All right, hi guys. We might make a start. Thank you all for coming. Before we begin today, we acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today. We pay our respects to their elders, both past and present, and into the future. And also, I'd like to thank Karen Burns for her mentorship and support in putting this symposium together, along with Donald Bates, the MSD marketing team and events team. They've been Philippa Knack, James Rafferty, there on the cameras, Sarah Brocklesby and Michelle Berder, as well as my close supporters and confidants, Courtney Foote and Jordan Head. Okay. So why is this important and why are we doing this today? This event, I hope, signals a transition, not just on the level of us individuals graduating here from the safety net and incubator here at the university into the wide and open, challenging world of architecture, but something much greater, a transition much greater, not just beyond our individual learning. I believe that it is important for us graduating students to pass on our valuable insights and lessons and experience onto you guys, the next generation. And in that, there is a transition of knowledge being passed over from generation to generation, compounding and enriching ideas, skills, and strategies. In the mid-year break, I was lucky and privileged enough to go to London on a short course there. At that time, I was also lucky enough that it coincided with the graduating exhibitions of some of the top architecture schools, probably on the globe, that being the AA, Bartlett and RCA. Going there and seeing that work for the first time was literally like taking drugs for the first time. The standard was incredibly high, incredibly consistent, and ultimately I questioned, what does it take to make an architecture school great? And I guess we can kind of compare, funding and finance and star tutors, but ultimately I believe it needs to come from the ground up, and very much in the case, that was the case with the AA. It was from the ground up and from the students themselves. The students are in a way the core fabric that kind of gives its school a reason to exist. The students and their willingness to risk more and go one step further than the generation before them. So then how can any ambitious student or person wanting to excel move beyond their own expectations and understandings of what they think and only what they know is possible, if someone hasn't already shown them what is possible and how far they can go to really take it to the next step? Well, travelling to London was that experience for me. So I think now in graduating, there is really no one architecture, nor does architecture really exist as a singular noun at all. But rather, there are only architects and architectures, and as Ching may explain, architects learning to architect. So the purpose of this event is not for these projects you'll see today here to be placed on a pedestal and glorified in any way, but for us to pass on our lessons and experiences, enabling you guys to go one step further than we did. I think this event is necessary, and I hope all of you will carry it on into the future. The purpose of today's panel is to exhibit different coordinates available in contemporary architectural practice and available to explore in the incubator of university. Our first presentation today will be Coralie Ming, who is the architect as aerial choreographer. Coralie here has recently completed and graduated from MSD. Her thesis investigated the use of drones, purposed in the task of autonomous construction of lightweight structures. Coralie is passionate about the high-end use of technology in architectural design, and she is currently working at Lions in Melbourne. Second today is Ching, the architect as thing, or architecting thing, if I got that right. Ching currently works at Perkins Architects here in Melbourne. Ching graduated in 2014, completing his thesis titled 7 Earthquake Memorials for Christchurch of Proust, Time, Memory and Memorial. He is currently learning to architect. And myself, I would consider my thesis as the architect as a director. I was a finalist in the Australian Institute of Architects Graduate Prize for my thesis project, Startup Sovereignty. I would describe my practice as a continual investigation into new models of architectural practice that intersects politics, community, finance and urbanity. So without much further description, I will ask Coralie to present her project to you all.
Okay, so hi everyone. Thank you for being here today. So as Tristan said, my thesis was about the use of drones in the autonomous construction of lightweight structures. It has been already done in indoor spaces, and my thesis was about trying to get these drones out of the laboratory and try to build lightweight structures with these drones. I did a research thesis, so that means it's probably different from a lot of what you're going to do. And so let's start. What I did for my thesis, I broke the time into 2 different phases. The first phase was the research phase, and that was what I tried to do here with building a bibliography. So that's what I did during the 4 or 5 first weeks of my thesis. And I was basically, up there at the library trying to find a spot to sit and, go through the books. And I think for you that's something very important because for thesis, I think the university expects you to know a lot about your subject. So basically, you need to do more research than your previous studio work. So that's the start of my final presentation. That's what I'm going to show you today. I'm not going to explain too much my project because this would take too much time. What I'm going to do is show you my final presentation and explain the rationale behind each of my slides, and also what went wrong and what went good. So that was my first slide, and the first couple of slides are about giving a historical context to my research. And I think that's important because it's always, you need to give context to what you're doing. And even if my research is very specific to the use of drones in architecture, I'm putting it within a larger frame. So this is some kind of the link between the flight and the utopia in the architectural history, and then moving on to this recent shift from theory to reality, and that's bringing me basically closer to my final research, which is drone. And I think architects are pretty visual people, so it's always good to have diagrams in your presentation and diagrams in your panels. And so this was to give a larger framework of, drones. It's linked to digital fabrication, to industrial production. So I'm basically, putting this frame around my project. And drones are part of the digital fabrication. So I talked a little bit about this as well. And also drones are used in other fields. So I talked about, how it's used for transportation, for 3D scanning. So basically, everything that's done now. I don't need the music. Okay, sorry. So these are, examples of drones being used in different faculties around the world to build different structures. So I'm showing this as the back of my research, and this is all the different research done in how drones were used to build tensile structures mainly around the world. So this slide really shows that I know what's happening in my field, and that was the last slide before me going to the experimentation. So from now on, it's my work, so what I did with the drones. And as I said, my idea was to have them used in an outdoor situation. So initially, I wanted to build my own drone, but it's very important. 12 weeks are just flying. And after 5-6 weeks, I started doing engineering course online, and at some point I just said, no, I can't do this, it's too much. So I went for this kind of machine and had as much everything I needed, all the sensors I needed to build an autonomous process. And then I designed this kind of automate the robotic process of my design. So what I did is route the navigation of my drones within architectural softwares, because we are in an architectural school, so I really wanted to have this as a starting point. Then I send all the instructions to my drones. The drones perform its path, and then I can extract the data, analyze it, and put it back again. So I designed this kind of process of feedback loop for my thesis, and this would be the kind of simulation I would do before all my different experimentations. So I would first design the path of the drone, and then do this little animation to just check that everything was going well. And if everything was going well, I would send the instructions to the drone. So that's the same idea, a bit more detailed, and that's just a quick example of one of these experiments. Okay, so that's just a very simple path sent to the machine, so basically it just performs the path and that's it. So I knew that my process was working, and now that's the final stage, so I can extract the data and then analyze what exactly happened during this process. And of course, when you do this kind of experiment and your thesis as well, nothing always goes as planned, and that was the case for me. At some point, I realized the drone wasn't doing as well as I wanted it to do. So I probably won't show this. So I had a few crashes, of course, and building and taking drones out of the laboratory is always pretty difficult, because you have the question of the wind, of rain, and I had these 6 weeks to try to have this interesting project, and I think that's something for you to always plan a bit more time than what you need, because that was for me crucial, and I had numbers and numbers of crashes in my thesis. So building with drones, you have wind, so I couldn't do it during rainy days. Then you need to calibrate the machine, so that's not building anything because the roller doesn't have enough friction, or there is too much friction, so it doesn't work either. Or I didn't have enough safety radius around my structure, so it would just it didn't work. So these were the final experiments I did. That's not very good. But when I started my thesis, I wanted to build autonomously a bridge. When I arrived at week number 9-10, I said, okay, let's downgrade a bit my expectations. Let's do something simple. So that's an open cable bridge, open cable beam system. Sorry, and that's what I ended up building. So in the end, it worked. So I built these different structures. So this is just to test around the little poles. Then I did this small cable bridge system. And yeah. Okay, and that's the last one. Okay, and that was my final slide of my presentation. It's basically what I did is during this presentation I went from something pretty general to specific to my project, and I'm kind of opening the possibilities again. So you have the way we could use drones to broaden the architectural possibilities, and that was my conclusion. And so just as a few things I could tell you, I think always seek advice from people. I've got amazing input from the guys at the Fab Lab, or just people giving me very good advices. Also be strategic, and if you have issues, just be creative around finding. Hi, Alberto. So Alberto was my supervisor. Thank you. And try to prepare your presentation. I've seen amazing projects that weren't very well presented, and it was very, very unfortunate. So yes, that's it. Thank you.
Thanks. Hello, my name is Ching, and I did independent thesis in 2014, quite a while ago, it seems now. Supervisors were Karen Burns and Dennis Pryor. And I looked at Christchurch as my site and ended up designing 7 pavilions as memorials in remembrance of the Christchurch earthquake. Having said that, today I'm not so concerned about presenting the final project and the whats of a thesis. Rather, I'm more concerned with presenting the thinking behind what goes on. And that's because I think in architecture school, students often get told a lot what to think, but not really how to think for ourselves, by ourselves. And so I wanted to give a snippet into my process of thinking throughout thesis and how I tried to take this through to design. Make no mistake, I'm ultimately interested in buildings. And so the thinking is about gearing towards making. So these are a few studies I did in week 1. So that's Christchurch after the earthquake. 20% of buildings left in the city, 80% completely rebuilt. A few figure ground studies. Something else. And so today the 3 things I want to talk about is having a position on architecture. And for me, in retrospect, during that time when I was doing thesis, was that architecture was essentially about things, about a thing. And then this would segue into a quick look into my personal agenda going into thesis. So these first 2 actually precedes thesis semester itself. It's a work in progress that has been going on for the past 2 years before I started doing thesis. And then finally, I'll just give you a brief, lowdown on the final boards of my final presentation. So, what is thing? Consider these next 3 phrases. Building never shapes pure space, neither directly nor indirectly. Building doesn't shape space. What? Space is not something that faces us. It's neither an external object nor an inner experience. Who says these things? And dwelling keeps in that with which mortals stay in things. Does anyone know who said this or where it's written? It's actually in Heidegger's Building, Dwelling, and Thinking. And so, for me, ultimately, architecture is about the search for ideas inherent in things. And experience comes after. Experience is a posteriori. We can't control it. We can only control the truth in which we perceive things. And in return, as architects, we choose how we can manifest them. So please don't label me as a phenomenologist. And this would segue into my intellectual agenda. So I started out thesis wanting to look at the works of Marcel Proust, which, 1, 2, 3, the 6 books on your left, 6 volumes of many words. Greg Missingham recommended the book on the right halfway through thesis, which contained all the paintings he wrote about in his books, short stories, poems, Ignore the Top 2, and Benjamin's Arcades project, which also deal with the topic of memory. Why Proust? This was why. So in his first book, he has his own thesis on what his books were going to be about. And it is this: the past is hidden somewhere outside the realm, and beyond the reach of intellect, in some material object of which we have no inkling, and it depends on chance whether or not we come upon this object before we ourselves must die. And so what he's trying to say is, we don't remember because we try to remember. We remember because, or when we come into contact with things, with physical material objects, and that in turn sparks our memory. It's involuntary. And so it comes and goes to the whim of things that we come across, and thus memory in its nature is always in flux, and it's very fragile. In week 4, I decided to submit a competition entry for the Christchurch Earthquake Memorial Competition. This was a way of testing Proust's or my stance on architecture and see where it can lead me. Very ugly diagram showing process. So the site is along the Avon River, and the proposal eventuated in this glass bridge, and I was particularly interested in exploring an idea called the mise en abîme, which means into the abyss. It's understood as having, when you have 2 mirrors and you look into them and they constantly reflect, and you stare into, well, infinity. But what happens with glass is that because it's slightly transparent, you get the reflection, but it also allows you to look through to the environment. And so this was one of the 2 boards that I presented, I submitted for the competition. And it's this glass bridge which takes you across the river, I suppose. And in the middle there is this blue stone thing encased in double glass. And so it's about the journey along this glass bridge where you have this reflection of yourself and of the things around you. And you come to this stone with the names inscribed of all the people that lost their lives during the earthquake. But it takes you close to the bridge, but you can't touch it. It's just beyond reach. And for me, that was a big step, because this was, in a way, an architectural manifestation of how I perceived memory and things to be. And so the weeks that ensued was about iteration, failure. This is, I don't know what this was actually. 3D plan section. So these 3 is one iteration, and I would pump these, about 3 or 4 of these out every week, just to let you know how much work is probably involved in trying to iron out a design or designs. Something else that I explored, another thing, which neither of these made it to final, by the way. Another thing, this is all before week 6 or week 7. And then we come to my final. Big jump. But I think for me the important stages are between 1 and 6, where you set yourself up. And then from 7 to 12, it's more or less when you've established yourself and you just keep going. So a quick account of the final presentation. Where are we? Okay. So these are my boards, and for my pavilions, I found 6 sites to engage with. So on the right, you can see, if you can read them, one is the Avon River, the Casual Mall, the temporary bus interchange, a fallen statue, Latimer Square, and Poplar Lane. And so these sites were charged in the sense that it gave me something to interact with, something for the thinking and the architecture to interact with. And my one memorial, that the first one is the traveling memorial, which is 185 sticks, really, lattices, which is a muted reference to how many people lost their lives during the earthquake. And so these would travel around 6 other in situ pavilions, changing their state. We also decided to name my pavilions, so I gave them kind of weird names. This one's called A Passing Tower, A Corridor of Shattered Absence, whatever that means. So this one's a brick laneway, and it's underground. It's situated in Poplar Lane. And so the travelling memorial in this case marks its presence and also grants access underground. What the pavilion is here is a series of glass panes that actually block your access once you descend. You come down and you're confronted with this chamber with a barrage of glass panes you can't go through. But what the pavilion is doing, it's waiting for the next earthquake where the glass shatters and would allow access through to the rest of the site. And so that is its final state. It waits. An event facilitates that final state. The next one, second of the series, A Passing Tower, Forgetful Plinth. So this one explores, well, forgetfulness, really. So in this case, the travelling memorial facilitates access underground once a year, where it's intended to be an exhibition in commemoration of the Christchurch earthquake. And when the travelling memorial moves on, the plinth becomes forgotten and recedes back into everyday civic life. Some images. The third one is called Contingencies Crossing, which is an unfinished bridge, as you can see in a little section there. Like the others, its final state is contingent upon the travelling memorial. Without that, it assumes the typology of a shed. The timber is exposed to the river, the elements, thus wearing down over time. And so it speaks of a potential ruin amid the topography. Without the travelling pavilion, the bridge only exists in memory. We finish it in our minds. Gilbert's Fountain is an homage back to Proust. It's situated in an island in the middle of Latimer Square, which is adjacent to where the CCTV building pancaked, taking about 115 lives. The pavilion evokes a certain sort of structural precariousness and engages with the idea of collapse through slow erosion. So it's a fountain, and water falls upon the structurally compromised rammed earth walls, which flank a tikuka, which is a native cabbage tree. And so as water erodes the walls, the tree grows. And here the travelling memorial acts as a proscenium arch, transforming it into a stage. Rupture. Slow Ruin is the name. Actually, Karen gave this pavilion its name, which is nice. I think it's the best name. Slow Ruin lies in axis with the Bridge of Remembrance, which is a World War I memorial. And unlike the bridge, it doesn't stand as an absolute form. Instead, it doesn't refute time. It accepts it. So it's manifested in 2 loggias, which are designed with dissimilar materials, zinc and copper. So the zinc columns sit on a copper plate, and over time the zinc rusts. Its final state is thus intended as a weathered condition, a ruin in the making. The travelling memorial transforms the loggias into another stage. And the last one is the Salon of Muted Reverie, which is where the sticks go and stay when they're not in use. And so the idea is that the condition of the salon it's always changing when the pieces come and go. And in this sense, it becomes open to interaction, places to sit, to play, to climb. And so that was a very quick and crude account of my 7 pavilions. they are all dispersed throughout Christchurch, so that how and when they are encountered is completely dependent on how someone uses the city. And so there are sites of accidental encounters. And just like memory, the impressions of the memorials are always ephemeral and in flux. Their true meaning arises from an effort to remember. Final words. Oh, yeah, that. Have a problem for architecture. Don't have a problem with architecture. Think about that one. And any questions, just let me know. The end.
Okay. And lastly, I'll present my thesis. I'll try to do it in two parts. I'd probably say the first half is sort of what I presented to the panel. It's kind of a highly scripted, kind of choreographed presentation. I kind of don't know any other way but to do it that way. And then for the second part, I'll kind of go through part of my process. I have a difficult time mitigating process and outcomes between each other. So anyway, excuse that. So in this future, the twin pressures of the increased flow of human movement and the limited available terrestrial space has led to a new range of built terrains, ushering in the age of startup sovereignty. The construction of these somewhat natural yet man-made territories from zero questions what architectural outcomes are possible when sovereignty is established, exploited and subverted through various political and legal frameworks. This was the world map before the development of these new island territories. This updated map charts these new island territories from zero as these islands draw new and at times challenging maritime boundaries. We now take a look at three of the most provocative recent establishments. The sovereignty for sale. This was the original template island, which was trialled initially and primarily used by NGOs and international institutions as a geostrategic arbitration zone in which to resolve disputes in the South China Sea. The island was the initial proof of concept. The ambition for this site is to play out architecture as a logistical and spatial product, produced by the conflicts and hopeful resolutions over territory in the South China Sea, illustrating the fact that architecture operates as a theatre of activity. This insertion redraws existing boundary lines in the area. Our next stop is the Republic of New Pirates. This renegade outpost hosts a population of digital pirates, otherwise seen as criminals and political outcasts in other countries. This island exemplifies a determination in asserting national and cultural identity. This island offers us a glimpse of what a community-owned data sharing network would look like.
In the vast Atlantic Ocean, members of the global pirate party movement have sought to create a true safe haven to ensure the freedom of access to information, network neutrality, and a direct participatory democracy. This small island nation was built to reflect the common identity of its people, in homage to our classical democratic ancestors. Upon arrival, all visitors are carefully screened at the Customs Control Building, ensuring their affinities are aligned with the Republic's goals. In tribute to the ancient Delphi city-state, at the Civic Center lies the nation's Parliament Hall. Hosting open data sharing companies such as Mega Upload and Pirate Bay, competition between these sharing networks is encouraged as companies jostle for terrain and primacy on the island. Forming the backbone of our national identity stands our tallest monument, a collectively owned asset, representative of a temple. Our data center ensures the continued operation of open access data to the world. The Republic of New Pirates is and always will be the world leader in freedom of information and the civil right to share and access it. Join the Republic of New Pirates today.
Our next stop in this trip around recent sovereign territories from zero is the independent state of the kinetic elite. As a cashed up, tax-free, duty-free, airport and leisure complex, this island may appear static, but it supports a transient global kinetic elite. Business executives who travel hundreds of miles every year, with executive lifestyles revolving around business travel demands. From a survey of the top business destinations by flights per year and the GDP of each of these cities, the global economic centre of gravity has been documented and is predicted to continually shift towards the east over the next 30 years. This location in the Indian Ocean has proven to be a highly strategic location that capitalises and reworks the stopover destination as a new travel destination.
Welcome to the state of the kinetic elite, where no matter what day, time, or season it is, our 6-star hotel and facilities are open 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. Located in the Indian Ocean, this new premium stopover destination ensures the shortest possible travel times to the fastest growing business centres across the globe. Our star attraction is the exclusive Arnold Palmer Golf Course. The layout ensures you will always have enough time to fit in a game. Replenish your spirit in the climate-controlled indoor forest park, bathed in light from the translucent low-emissions glass structure and maintaining a constant temperature and humidity. The park offers kayaking, tennis, and a range of winding walks. The prestige equestrian space is replete with world-class trainers and features ample riding arenas. Guests are welcome to ride their own horses or one of ours. When business calls, our island airport complex makes the duty-free experience your home away from home. Seen from the air, the plush-shaped island reminds departing visitors that the community of the kinetic elite is the ultimate location for sleep, relaxation, and recreation.
So collectively, these places really share no single logic at all, beyond representing mere exceptional conditions as legal lacunas entitled to the exemption of the law. However, when such sites are adopted by rogue nations, entrepreneurs, diplomats or pirates, these sovereign territories highlight the imbued myths, desires and symbolic capital that can be activated within the architect's role. And that concludes the formal part of my presentation. What most people, I guess, probably didn't see is, well, previous to this, I guess I did a series of technical studies, and I should admit that I actually did a year-long studio. The work that you saw just then, I did do in the space of one semester. However, there almost was a semester, precursing semester before that, which I almost see as a sacrificial semester. A semester of sort of failures and ideas that weren't necessarily converging on one single strong idea. What I can show you from that semester, I don't have time to go into it, but it was really one idea, how to literally grow an island. Like, how could you do it? Like, we know there's sand dredging and all the like kind of happening currently in the South China Sea, and as well as man-made structures. But if you were able to grow a structure semi-naturally, what does that mean? And then what does that start to brush up against? So my first semester was just almost, it really was a speculative poke at what would that sort of mean. So really, what does it mean to then grow an island? So I started then looking in through the break, and when I was in London, thinking about, well, what is the definition of statehood and how do you get it? Like, how do you become kind of a country? And so I kind of went on to research that, as well as, like, technically, according to the United Nations, what actually is an island? How do you sort of define an island? And that gave me initial impetus to start thinking about, well, if I can create these naturally man-made islands that almost find a loophole within the United Nations definition of an island, I can then therefore begin an argument for building statehood. So what began as a pretty boring, sort of dry, speculative idea, I had to find something for it to rub up against, something in the real world that it could really sort of jostle and affect. So then, I guess progressing into semester 2, I started looking for sites and reasonable areas that I thought would make a good location, and then I'd basically make a catalogue, a really boring sort of taxonomical location. And each of them had their own geostrategic benefits. At the same time, I was also looking and reading about a lot of precedents, so people who have done this before. I probably should stress that most of what you think about or what we think about kind of has been done before to some degree, and it's your responsibility to be educated about that and to take that one step further. So don't just think you're kind of wildly original, because that's near impossible these days. So I built a catalogue of artificial islands and kind of categorised them. Ones that fell into military planning, one that fell into leisure centres, ones that fell into industry. These were early, really rough renders for at my mid-semester break. So at this point I knew what I was doing. I had a short list and I was building my narrative and kind of my own imagination and story around what these islands would be. And I would emphasise design fast. Like, you have no time to just, I'm pretty focused on outcomes, I'll be honest. I pick a goal and I kind of go for it. My process is kind of pretty direct. And so I kind of just sort of go for it, I guess in contrast to these guys. At that same time, I was developing a story for these islands. So who would occupy them and who would they be on? So I was finding real world cases. So yes, there was actual political parties around the world. Subsequently, when I was designing, I also had precedents of artwork that I looked at to try to give me an idea of the feel and how I wanted these sort of places to sort of be represented. And as well, this is also a picture of someone's work at the Bartlett exhibition as well. So by no means was my vision kind of anywhere original. It was an assembly of many different things I've seen. So that probably concludes the first part of the formal presentations. I guess I might now just kind of quickly, we'll have a bit of time for discussion around a few things that we covered. I guess I'd like to ask both you, Coralie and Ming, going into thesis, what do you think your strengths and weaknesses were, your limitations and opportunities in your preparation, and how did you, I guess, plan for this, do you think?
Let's start with weakness, productivity. I'm not different to everyone else, I think, in the sense that I like to procrastinate. And what I discovered in Studio E just before thesis was that you're actually the most productive in the last 2 days before deadline. And so what I decided to do was see every week when I saw Karen as a deadline. And that got me producing very quick, very fast, like Tristan said, to the point. And it works. Strength, I knew what I wanted to do. I had the reading background knowledge. I read about 50 books in the first 2 weeks before thesis, and many others before then. What was the question again? Memory's not my strength. Probably why I did my thesis on memory. Christchurch was home for me, so that made things easier. Another weakness would probably be that I like to fluff around in theory, and Karen did a very good job in grounding me day one. I think that's it.
So I'll start with the strength. I think I'm pretty good at time management, and that helped me a lot. I'm not a big fan of doing all-nighters and stuff. I'm already finished at 12 a.m. max. Otherwise, my partner is like. And I think one of the strengths as well is in this project is I did an independent thesis, so that means approximately, let's say, 4 weeks or 3 weeks before the beginning of the term, I already had a bit of an idea where I was going. So I think that helped me a lot. And regarding the weaknesses, I think, when you do a research project, you don't really know what the outcome will be, and I think, also, all this technical knowledge that you need to. I guess you had this issue as well, trying to learn all these new programs, and that it takes time, and so that would be one of the weaknesses.
Yeah, I would say. I've got the mic. Probably. Pretty early on in the semester, I decided that I wanted to make films, and I was thinking, being a deterministic person, I was pretty much thinking about the presentation, those sort of 12 minutes and those images that you sort of show. I don't know if that's sort of over-rationalising things and kind of killing the spirit, but ultimately that's like, for me, those are sort of my assets. So I was thinking about the programs I'd want to use, and yes, it was a challenge to learn 3ds Max, having not used it before, but I did have someone to help me to do part of it, and I learnt a lot of it myself. Probably something that I planned for, I guess an opportunity was I got a studio outside of university. I hate with a big project like that, I want to be able to spend a whole day on it, or 2 days on it. I don't want to have to be interrupted by 3 other sort of things. And so really working at university wasn't an option. University is great if you want to circulate ideas quickly and I guess kind of collaborate with others, but I don't see it as an ideal place for me to actually get stuff done, to really pump out the work.
Well, yeah, I think it depends on how how well you work and where you work well. For me, it was really important to be here as much as I could to talk to people and have good advices. But then that's true. I would do a lot of the work at home or writing at home. So I guess that's everyone's different.
I wanted to ask you guys about asserting your own design agenda, which I see as probably quite one of the most sort of critical things in thesis. I mean, thesis is almost that point where you probably can go off the leash a little bit more. Do you guys think, how did you deal with asserting your own design agenda? Do you think you, in a way, sort of challenged the status quo on whatever topics or content you sort of picked, or were you sort of assimilating it and trying to push an already existing body of knowledge?
I guess depending on your project. I think the thesis, it's time to kind of push the boundaries, and especially I think we all did independence, did we?
Technically, I did, yes. I was part of the Matter long year studio, but Mond and Jam pretty much just let you run wild in the woods. So.
I think that's an interesting alternative to the do it independently, because it's like your own subject, it's like your topic, and you can have very good supervisors that will indicate you some path or just some. Books to read, but you're on your own basically. So I think, I don't know what you.
I don't really know what the status quo is, and I think that's probably to my benefit when doing thesis. I knew I had an agenda going in. I knew it before I started doing masters that I wanted to look at Proust, and so my studios and electives were all geared towards learning about architecture, forming some sort of an opinion, tools, whatever. So I could do that in my final semester. It's probably very rare that someone does this, but what I've come across in students that have the most engaging or the best work is every single one of them, whether they know it or not, have personal agenda, a design agenda, an agenda for architecture that they're continuously trying to explore. Let me give you an example. A friend of mine, which I did thesis with, he was obsessed with Freud. And so since Studio C, every single project had some sort of Freudian idea behind it. But here's the thing, he never explicitly accounts for Freud in his presentations or his work in studio. It's just something that he's interested in and something that drives him. And you can tell with students like that, the thinking is different. It's more refined. It's got more purpose. And whether or not you find it now, you find it after, I think if you find it, as long as you do find it, that's the important thing.
Probably have time for one or two last discussion points. I guess it was good to have these projects because I think they kind of locate different practices and different ways of working. So I wanted to ask you guys, how do you think you, mitigated between process, sort of exploring and researching and kind of going into depth, and then at some point going, okay, I need to produce something. I need to sort of find the jewels in this. I kind of think maybe we all had different...
for me, as I presented, it was, kind of a nightmare to, at some point, find the right technology. And even if it wasn't, the best, and at the beginning I had higher expectations. And yes, at some point you realize you need to produce something. And I think this happens with time, as you said. We have deadlines, you need to produce things for deadlines. I wanted to build something autonomously with a drone, so at some point I just picked the easiest way to build something autonomously. And I
noticed you initially had kind of grand, you wanted to build this bridge. I'm assuming, I don't know, a human or maybe even a cat could walk across it, for instance. But then I guess, mitigating and realizing all that, you kind of had to go, okay, I've got to produce something, and what's actually feasible. And what I think was sort of successful in what you did was to, kind of drill down to the core of really what that ambition was to kind of get this structural system, which we all recognise within the language of architecture, to work.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, that was that was the end product. So, yeah. And you?
Sorry, what was the question?
Mitigating between process and outcome.
Deadlines. That's why the week deadline is so good. A day before, you meet up with your tutors, supervisors. Take that day very seriously. Treat it as a presentation. And so the better you are at producing, so for example at the start, I would maybe have, say I make it on Thursday, I would probably read Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and then Tuesday I start working on presentation, and that's kind of when, I've got a deadline, I've got to make something. But the important thing is coming back to what you've done after. There's a very big difference between what you set out to do and what you've actually done, and being able to read what you have done after the fact is probably equally as important as having some sort of intent, because that would drive what you do next week and the week after. If you're not good at reading your own work after the fact, then it becomes hard because you're not in a good place to judge your own work.
I would say probably one of my anxieties is jumping in and committing to an idea or something before I really believe in it. Like I won't just pick something up and kind of go along with it. And so almost like for that first semester before thesis, I kind of washed around like 10 ideas. And then eventually sort of found the one that I really wanted to go with. I remember our tutors at the start of that, they said, pick and define your matter. Like that was the aim of the studio. And it wasn't really up until week 12 that I actually defined what my matter was. And that was a task that they set for me in like week 2. And I just like refused blatantly. Like I don't do locking something in and just hoping for the best. Like,
and matters change. Allow it to change what you start off with. I started off with something, I ended up with something altogether different. It always changes. There is no perfect idea. There's just a suitable idea for the context that you are given.
Okay. We're probably, fast running out of time. I guess it's a good time now for, if you guys have any questions you'd like to sort of throw at us, any hard ones, we'd be happy to answer them to our best. Yeah.
For the two that didn't have a year, do you wish you had a year to do thesis, or do you think that would just cause more procrastination?
I think it could, involve more procrastination doing it in a year, but 12 weeks is almost nothing. I think, I don't know. Is it at the AA? Is it a year as well? The thesis project?
Equivalently, yeah. They have a system of what they call a trimester. Yeah. So they have 3 trimesters, and small breaks in between. Mond and Jen, who led our studio. My tutor did go to the AAE, and that's part of why we went over to London. He explained how they do a year, and their sort of first half, first trimester, is basically kind of technical studies. So like pick an idea and research the hell out of it and just own it, and then become the authority of whatever it is you choose. So I became the authority of islands and making islands and micronations, and that was my thing. And then you kind of own it. And then through going through that process, you then find things you want to rub up against, like looking for opportunities. So what if you could create your own country? It was sort of like, what? I guess it wasn't really a sort of a problem, but creating islands and countries has kind of made many problems and also had many opportunities. So.
Nope. Longer isn't good. Well, I think the 12 weeks is adequate. You just have to go in with a clear mind, an open mind. I did undergrad in New Zealand, in Victoria. There we have a year-long thesis, and students don't actually finish until 2 years after. So that's not good. The more time you have, the more time you waste, really.
Okay. Are there any other questions? Yep, I'll continue in a sec. Yep, do you want to go ahead?
How did you guys manage your workload in general? Were you taking other subjects and electives, and were you working at the same time? Like, did you just not see anyone you knew?
Yeah, that's okay. I was working, part-time up until I started that last semester thesis, and I saved up a lot of money. I knew kind of what I wanted to do, and I knew how much it would all cost, making those renders, and I just didn't have the own industry in my own to pump out the renders, so I had to get that done offshore. So I didn't work. And I also did one other elective. So I worked equivalently 75%. I've sort of been doing most of that throughout, as well as summer subjects. Because I had a studio, I saw that also as an opportunity where I could have a lot of time. So I will admit, I did sleep in my studio probably for the last month, on and off. It was kind of gnarly. I wouldn't recommend doing it. But I had to kind of be there for literally for the work, because these renders take so much time, and I'd have to get up at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, check that it's worked right, and then hit the render button and it would go again. So yeah, it was kind of all or nothing, pretty much.
Yeah, I think it depends how much you want to invest in your thesis. I did an elective and I didn't work at that time, and that was just enough time to invest to a thesis.
And being quite a technical thing that you did, like that's, you know, it's not just, you were going into a new body of knowledge that you did. And I've also done a project on drones once, and I did build it, but it pretty much did take me the whole semester just to kind of get it working really well. And I only really had like 2 weeks to actually play around and kind of explore it. So I think that was kind of a good tactic of yours to go, all right, I'm not going to build it, I'm just going to kind of get the thing so I can get straight into what I want to explore.
Same here. No, didn't work. Lightened my load, so I did thesis and one elective.
I just wondered if Ching could unpack what you were saying about letting the work talk back to you. It sounds like you allowed time in the process for that.
Yeah, it's a skill which I've developed over, masters. It's a hard thing to do because you're attached to your work. When you set out to do something, you have this intent. You have an idea, and then you have to work. Traditionally, we think of it that way. When I say let the work talk back to you, what I'm trying to say is, instead of thinking of the work as being driven by what you think, see it as someone else who would see it. So what you think at that point doesn't matter. What is the work trying to tell you? So, for example, you might set off trying to design a table, but if it turns out looking like a chair, you have to be ready to say, hey, I've actually ended up designing a chair, not a table. A chair table. And then, that would, then you have that gap between what you set out to do and what you've ended up with. And I think, and that becomes very important because that would then drives questions. You go, okay, what went wrong? Or maybe a chair is better.
Did the critics sort of drive that process, or how did you?
Sorry, say that again?
Did you let the critics' feedback drive that process?
No. Yes and no. So I did it, so every single work that I do, so every iteration, I will have intent. I will do the work thinking it's going to be that, and then after that I'll go. Sometimes it works out that way. Sometimes it goes, oh yeah, it reads what I want it to read as. But sometimes when you detach from it, you kind of go, yeah, okay, maybe it's not so much. Maybe it's something else altogether. I find that there is one easy way of doing that, which is actually taking a picture of what you've done. So say you've made a model, you've made a rendering. It's hard to just stare at the screen. If you take a picture and look at the picture, it's a trick that works.
Everything.
Yeah, and it separates you from the work, and that degree of separation helps. Another helpful thing, I think, for me anyway, I call it the morning after test, which is when you have an idea, right? You think it's the best thing ever. Sleep on it. Just wake up the next morning and go, is this still a great idea? Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not, and that's when you know. Any other questions?
Nope. All right then. Well, I guess that probably ends it. I guess you're all probably got busy days. So thank you all so much for coming, and I hope that this probably will happen either next semester or the start of next year, and hopefully some of you will be presenting your projects in the future. So thanks.